So I have a couple of examples here to show you about this idea of fair use and how it's really a whole lot of interpretation that goes into determining whether using something that is copyrighted work is a fair use or whether it's a copyright infringement. And remember, essentially, fair use is a defense that can be used against copyright infringement. So, in other words, fair use is basically giving somebody permission to use part of a copyrighted work without infringing on copyright. And this first example begins with a cover of the New Yorker magazine from 1976. This piece of art here was done by an artist named Steinberg. And it sort of depicts this idea of the myopic view of New Yorkers, how they basically see, the entire world as New York City, and then beyond that, they really don't care. And this sort of thing is, something that is expressed in a lot of different ways. I've kind of seen this same kind of idea expressed in other ways. But you can see that what he has here is he sort of has, the buildings of New York City and then the Hudson River. And then basically everything on the other side of the Hudson River is stuff that, we don't care about. So you can see there's a couple of cities of the United States marked there, a couple of mountains, the Pacific Ocean, eventually some other continents. But more or less, the entire world is New York City. So that was on the cover of New Yorker. And then later in 1984, I believe it was, this movie Moscow on the Hudson came out and used this poster. And this poster, you can see, has some of the similar elements to it. It has the stars of the movie in the foreground, has the Hudson River in the foreground as well, has some city buildings there, and then has the Atlantic Ocean, and then basically goes all the way over to Paris and London and then Moscow. And Steinberg, who did the art for the New Yorker, sued as a copyright infringement. The movie company claimed fair use, but was essentially unable to prove it in court. And the court actually ruled that this was a copyright infringement, so ruled in favor of Steinberg. And they basically cited the style of the poster, how the lettering is very similar, how the view is very similar, and even though it's sort of the opposite direction of the original, it's still sort of the same idea. And so once again, they ruled that this was a copyright infringement. Then we have this other example, and this is an example that Franny Leibowitz, who is a well-known photographer, did this cover of Demi Moore on Vanity Fair, and this was in 1991 when Demi Moore was pregnant, and so she did this cover of her, which became very famous, very well known. It got a lot of attention. And then later, the movie Naked Gun came out, and this was, I don't know if you're familiar with any of the Naked Gun movies, but if you're not, they're basically just sort of like farce comedies that had Leslie Nielsen in them. And Leslie Nielsen is the guy whose head we see superimposed on the model here. And this was a promotional poster done for that. And Leibowitz sued once again, arguing that this was a copyright infringement. However, in this particular case, the court ruled against Leibowitz. So they actually said that this was a fair use. And they actually also recognized the idea that this was kind of a parody. And they actually pointed out that the lighting is different in the two photos. The ring that the model is wearing is like larger and more garish than the ring that Demi Moore was wearing. And they really pointed out the fact that Leslie Nielsen sort of has this goofy smirk on his face, as opposed to Demi Moore, who has like a very serious sort of contemplative look. And so the court cited all of these things as, artistic choices And once again, the idea of parody and also this idea of sort of a transformative use. In a sense, because basically this movie poster is not trying to do the same thing that the Vanity Fair cover was attempting to do. So again, two different cases with two different outcomes, but I think reasonable people could probably argue for each one the opposite point of view. And as I said, this is a lot about interpretation of individual courts, individual judges.